It always did it. This one they have this sort of thing. It's such a good thing to do that. And then I took this product, it was mine, I put it over. So really.
There it is, you go.
Well, hello, everybody. I've got noon, yeah? Something like that? All right.
It's no longer Boca Raton.
It is, yeah, it's Ryan Tovim, a happy new year, all that good stuff. Anybody celebrate a good new family custom you started this past holiday season? Spencer?
So it's not necessarily new, but it's newish. My grandmother and I, for the second time, and planning for many more, spent the New Year's together.
Very nice. Very nice.
So-
I had a challenging New Year's Eve because I landed that morning at 8 AM on a flight back from Israel. And had been up for like, a day and a half already. I did sleep on the plane a little bit and then really but I made it like into the evening, past midnight on New Year's Eve. The hard part was when I woke up the next morning at 6 AM. For no good reason whatsoever. So New Year's Day for me was particularly rough. And then for those of you who saw me last Friday, I was back and in the saddle and ready to go. So anyway, wishing everybody goodness is in the new year. I feel like the room is gonna tilt over to my left. Everyone's sitting on the one side. If anybody over there wants to spread out, there's plenty of room on this side of the room.
You only look on the left.
That's not true. I look to the right, I'm right hand. We have assigned seats. I wasn't giving a seating chart. And I feel like Professor Kingsfield in the paper chase. I'm gonna call on people looking at my face, Mr. Gluck, what are your thoughts on the matter?
On what?
Exactly, all right. So it's good to be with you. This is gonna be a 3-week course. The last week of January, we have a special guest. Cantor Josh Breitzer is gonna be joining us from New York. And he's gonna be teaching Lunch and Learn on Tuesday, the 20th, whatever that last Tuesday is. So we have 3 weeks together, this week and the following 2. And I have a lot that I wanna try to cover. We're not gonna get to all of it, but that is okay. So what I wanna do at least today, is I wanna lay out the groundwork, the foundation for this new social justice undertaking the congregation is now a year and a half into. And I'm gonna roll us back to a little bit of the origin story, but just to say that the reason why we thought this would be a good conversation for us to have is that there was so much thought put into what our justice work was gonna look like. This was not something where we said, oh, let's just open up the newspaper and see what's going on in the world and decide that's what we want to pursue. We really wanted to begin the conversation with what does our tradition tell us about our responsibilities to the world around us? And then from there, build out what our work is going to look like. And so what I'm going to walk us through is not so much the conversations, but the outcomes of the conversations that about 12.5 folks that were deeply involved in this conversation led us to, which ended up with our core position statement, which is up on our website, but you will see is pretty in-depth. Okay? And what I'm gonna do along the way is not only show you like the little snippets that we chose, but really the textual backgrounds for some of the teachings that we think are forming the foundation of our work. Is that a clear path for where we're going with this? I want to encourage everyone to ask questions along the way. If you're wondering why or what, stop me, otherwise I'll just keep talking. But here we go.
Why did we choose to have a social justice program?
That's where we're gonna start. So some of you may know that going back to 2013, the temple had a 10-year strategic plan that we accomplished, or we were wrapping it down in the late 20 teens. We had really accomplished much that we were going to accomplish. And it was actually in the early part of 2020 that we began a process of starting a new strategic planning initiative, right? And a strategic planning process often is about an 18-month process between identifying who the leaders are going to be, and then going through a process of exploring with interviews and surveys and conversations, what are the things that the congregation is most interested in pursuing, and then answering what we want to try to accomplish, and then what are the steps along the way that we need to do that, what are the resources that we need, and that takes about 18 months. So we started this conversation like literally January of 2020, and then something happened. COVID, right? So our ability to think long-term had to be set on the shelf because we had to worry about things week to week, month to month, what we were going to do. 2 years later, 2.5 years later, coming out of COVID, we realized, okay, it's time to get back to work. And so a strategic planning process task force was impaneled that had about 12.5 people. We spent a lot of time in this room, and we explored what are the things that the congregation really needs in this moment. And there were 4 areas that came out of that. One was re-examining our worship, with the notion that what we do on Friday nights in the sanctuary is generally successful for a meaningful segment of our congregation. So we don't want to change that, but it's only a segment of our congregation. And there's a much larger segment of our congregation that doesn't participate in Friday night services. What might we want to do for them? That was one question. One question was around building consistency from the preschool through the religious school. How is it that we can make those congregation members of our community feel connected not only to their school experience for their kids, but to the congregation as a whole? The third was looking at our long-term financial sustainability, and that is where the endowment campaign that we are currently in is an outgrowth of that work. And the fourth was a realization that the members of our community, while satisfied with our social action work, the direct service, the feeding the hungry, the clothing the naked, the giving tree, those kinds of projects that we've done, that there was a thirst and a desire to expand that work beyond just solving problems as they arise, but looking longer term into what could we do in advance to perhaps change or alleviate the problems on the ground, right? We could spend the next 25 years feeding every hungry person in Palm Beach County. And on day 20, on the first day when we were done, there would be hungry people again, right? Which is different than asking the question, what might we be able to do to alleviate hunger in our community? That's an example of the expansion of thinking that we were thinking about, not a shift, right? There was never a desire to step away from the service and the social action, but it was an expansion into this other side. And so what we heard in the questions that we asked and the surveys and the one-on-one conversations was that people felt this type of work was core to being part of a congregational community. That it wasn't just about looking good in the newspaper, and it wasn't just about the mitzvah of service, but it was also that it was something that could bring people together as a member of this congregation. I joined Bethel, I stay at Bethel, I'm proud of Bethel, because this is the type of things that Bethel does, whether or not I'm involved in every single project that is going on. It was this notion that everything might not be for everyone, but there was something for almost everyone in this work. And we had a 30+ year history of really taking ownership of a project like this, which is the Giving Tree. The Giving Tree started as a very small kernel of a couple of families and Christmas gifts, and has expanded to Christmas gifts and holiday gifts for over 2,000 people. The back to school drive that we do every year in the spring, the quiet giving that we do the year round. There's a lot more to the Giving Tree than just what happens on Christmas Eve. And that has expanded over the years, but it also has given us really good insight with our community partners as to what are the needs that are out there. And the expansion of the Giving Tree was responsive to what we heard from the community partners that we had in the community. But we had to get clarity of language, right? Because we understand that some of the things that when people hear the word social justice, some people, their defensiveness gets up. They get defensiveness around what are the projects we're going to be doing. They get defensive around their political proclivities. They get worried about, is the temple going to be wading into politics actively, whether or not I agree with those politics. And for some people, that is uncomfortable. And so there was a lot of framing, a lot of thinking, a lot of exploring and expressing what the work would be and how we would do it that needed to be done before we could get to work. And so we set for ourselves these goals. And there, I'm talking, there's a slide deck for those who want to look along. I don't think you need to so much as I'm talking. We wanted to enable congregants to be living exemplars and advocating for Jewish moral values. In a nutshell, that's what we want to do. We want to live out our teachings of our Torah and our tradition in the world in which we live. It's easy to do that in the sanctuary. It's easy to do that in the Beit Midrash. It's easy to do that at a funeral or a wedding or a baby naming or a bar mitzvah. It's easy to do that while traveling to Israel. It's a little bit more complicated when you ask yourself, a lot of people in our community, a lot of faith organizations are rallying around a question and the wondering of, does our tradition say something about that question? And what should we as a congregation do about it, if anything? And so again, this idea of articulating what are our core stances going to be to guide what initiatives that we're going to feel comfortable engaging with or not. Are we going to say no to a lot of things? You bet. Are we going to say yes to some things? I hope so. But having clear criteria and expectations is what allows us to say yes and what empowers us to say no. And you need that guidance. Otherwise, it's just people making decisions ad hoc, and that is not a good long-term strategic place to be. Okay?
Is the social justice, right now, doing different things than other organizations in the community are doing? In other words, are we overlapping, or are we working with, or are we trying to find a niche for ourselves?
It's a great question. If you couldn't hear the question Susan asked, she asked, are we overlapping with other folks? Are we collaborating with other folks? Or are we filling in space where no one is there? And the answer is a little bit of all three. I think that most of our work, and listen, we are not a social service agency. We are not an issue advocacy organization. We are a synagogue. We are a community who comes together with shared values. And while not everyone shares every single comma and every single letter and every single vowel and every single thing that we stand for, there are certain things that we stand for. And so we can work in collaboration and in partnership. We can work in community, and we can also be a leader, right? So for example, we are not looking to offload the giving tree into some other organization. We are going to continue to lead in that space because it is core to who we are as a congregation. And that specific type of service work is something that we want to actually elevate and expand while being the driving force behind it. And advocating, for example, for LGBTQ plus rights as one institution in a big state, we are probably the most effective when we are working in a consortium, when we are working with other houses of worship and other organizations, be they secular or religious, that share a perspective on that particular question. So building a program and a process that is nimble is also a piece of all of this. Alan?
Yeah. Was this strategic plan, was it, how does it interface with the reform umbrella agencies?
Okay, so that's a good example. There are basically two big umbrella organizations of the Reform. Technically, they're one, but they had two different brands. The Union for Reform Judaism is the consortium of synagogues, of which Bethel is a member. And one of the projects of the URJ is the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which basically has functioned as the social action committee of the Reform movement for the better part of 60 years. It has a board, it has the Commission on Social Action that sets the governance policy. These are the issues that the reform movement is committed to. And the RAC does the work of learning those issues, coming up with potential solutions, and equipping congregations and other reform folks to be able to act on those values. It's a great question. And so looking to where can we as a synagogue interface and work with them in collaboration is a piece of the puzzle. Great question. Spencer, then I want to move forward.
After RAC people.
I talk to them every week, so we'll.
I mean, you had on the service, right? They were brought a few years ago.
Yes, we've had different folks in the racket at different times at a lot of different things, so I don't wanna get too bogged down.
You said two groups, what's the second?
Well, the rack and the URJ they sort of have two brands, but they themselves are in cahoots with one another. So we needed to decide what we were gonna do. We needed to make sure that we built out a leadership structure, not on the staff side, but on the lay side. In order for this work to be effective, it can't just be the VP of Social Justice and the Director of Social Justice and the rabbi doing the work. We need an army of volunteers, some who are volunteer leaders, some who are volunteer middle management, some who are volunteer doers, and all those different pieces are going to be what you need to get 2,000 households plus to be able to work together and be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
You have a lot of volunteers, so just ignore many of them.
Susan, I'm not gonna get distracted by that. We're gonna keep going forward. And we gotta pay for some of this stuff. Right? Some of this stuff takes money. When we wanna go to Tallahassee, for example, and we wanna hire a bus, that costs money. We wanna pay people to be able to do things. We wanna buy t-shirts. Yes, we can ask folks to pay for their own participation, but there's a certain point where we say, maybe the congregation should be investing in this like we invest in Shabbat services, right? Shabbat services cost nothing to the participants and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to the congregation to be able to put on week in, week out. And we spend that, you all spend that as members of the congregation who pay your dues to the board because this is something the congregation ought to be doing, and this is where we ought to be spending our money. All right. Finding volunteers, by the way, Susan, is not so easy. Asking folks to show up to something is easy. Getting folks to commit to lead and take a leadership responsibility and recruit other volunteers, that is always the most challenging piece to it. Bernard.
How much is there in the budget right now, that goes for social action?
So it's hard to answer that question directly. There's about $25,000 to $30,000 in programmatic funds, but we've got a full-time director of social justice, right? Who her salary is paid for out of the temple's budget, so she can be overseeing this work. So it's not so easy to answer that question directly.
For program, forget about her salary, but from program issues,
Right.
the plus.
So as an example, last year, the temple spent about $15,000 to help augment sending teens to Washington on their advocacy trip to Washington, DC. The kids did pay some money out of pockets, but we knew that if we could incentivize by subsidizing, we would have different participation. To give you an example, in 2023, the kids paid their own way, and I had 4 participants. In 2025, a year ago, when we subsidized it, we had 15. Right? That helped a lot to get kids to want to go. And a second staff person at that.
Yes, you could be Professor Skinfield assign problems and Spencer could be his best student art.
What's that? I didn't understand it, I'm sorry.
You could be Professor Skinfield who assigned problems to be solved, and Spencer could be his best student art.
Potentially. Dory.
I was gonna say, my son, unfortunately in 2018, went up to Tallahassee after
Right.
the shooting at Douglas.
Right.
And I don't remember what the circumstances are, whether it was, how it was, but
It was ad hoc and last minute.
Right, but I have to say it was very profound.
Right.
Very profound.
And that was a really good example of something that we heard from the folks, which is to say, that's the kind of stuff, and this is the general perspective from the congregation. Those are the kinds of things we want our congregation to be doing. We want to be empowering our teens, for example, but not just our teens. when there's something in the community that's of concern, we want to be able to, and these are the words that I use. We have a very loud and powerful voice as the oldest congregation, oldest synagogue in Boca Raton, as the largest synagogue in Florida. We have a large and powerful voice that we could use, should, and how we want to. But we really weren't well equipped to be able to, because we were only using it in response to tragedy, like in 2018 at the shooting in Douglas, as opposed to, because you can go to Tallahassee once every 6 years, and it feels really meaningful, and it is, but that's different than having a relationship with the folks who are there every single day. And building that relationship takes time and investment, and that's where this work may take us. So the strategic plan was adopted by the board, and the first step was to impanel a different group of people, a group of social justice leaders, some of whom had served as our temple's past social action vice presidents, some of whom were involved in the work already, some of the folks who were sitting on the board, to lay out, okay, what are we going to be doing, right? What are the values that we stand for? And how might that guide us to decide what might our undertakings be? So that we began with, as any good nonprofit does, a mission and a vision. So the social justice mission of Bethel, and you can see there's a parallel in the language from the temple's general mission, to enrich lives and improve the world by living out our Reformed Jewish values. Simple, direct, to the point. And our vision, a world that is safe, just, free, and fair. We're not there yet. Right, but that's what a vision is for. A vision is meant to be bakery, and not just pie in the sky, but bakery in the sky. Because the vision is what you keep your eye on as you're making decisions. Are we moving towards or away from this? What's that?
How do you do that?
Well, so I want to use Fern's question as a step aside. Fern asked the question, how do you do that without getting political? The answer is you do and you can't, right? There is a difference between wading into a question that is also part of the political dialogue. Okay, in 2018, when we took our teams to Tallahassee to advocate for stricter gun violence prevention measures in the state of Florida, that certainly has a political valence to it. Okay, when you go lobby members of elected officials, that has a political valence to it. But the question becomes, what is your why, and where are your relationships that you're building, and who are you working with? In 1862, the question of slavery, of enslavement of human beings, was, among other things, it was political. The Democrats were in favor of it. The Republicans were against it. We fought a war over it. It had a political valence. It also had a moral valence. It also had a religious valence. It had a lot of different valences to it. And so what synagogues and other houses of worship and nonprofits in have typically been asked to do is to step away from the question of, are we motivated by politics, right? Are we acting in concert with an elected official, a political party, a political movement, which has generally not been the place to come from, or to say, on this particular question, this is what we believe, and we are going to advocate for this belief, and we're going to advocate to everyone, and whoever is wanting to work with us and trying to pursue this is our partner. They could be on one side of the aisle, they could be on the other, right? Thinking, for example, at least historically, advocacy and support for Israel in the American political context was at the same time, both political and bipartisan, right? If you went to lobby in Washington in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, even in the early 2010s with AIPAC or AJC or whomever, it was bipartisan, right? Doesn't mean you were avoiding politics, but you were actually trying not to make it political. You were trying to bring political people into a non-political conversation. Or a question about a single policy, right? So congregations have historically and continue to be actively and advocating for a particular policy, or multiple at one time, right? So we can advocate for a certain position around immigration, or gun violence prevention, or whatever the issues may be. And when it's policy oriented as opposed to political oriented, that is the place you need to be. Some folks won't see through that. Some folks will say this is inherently political. And this was one of the questions that our leadership had to weigh, which is, even if the congregation can come at this from an apolitical perspective, and believe me, we can, there will be some folks who can't see it that way. And they may be disappointed in that. But this is not a congregation that requires complete uniformity and unanimity of thoughts. We work on consensus. Mitchell.
So this is the question.
Yeah.
Is there a protocol set forth in writing
Mhm.
of the people who you have in these positions that they have to follow, even if they don't agree with it?
What do you mean?
I lost you at the last part of the
Okay,
question.
so for instance, you have a panel of people.
Yeah.
This person in charge of this, this
Yeah.
person in charge of this. The temple has set forth what they feel the temple wants to
Yeah.
represent.
Right.
Necessarily, the people who you have in charge may not necessarily agree with everything you have set forth as the protocol. So
Yes.
how, and you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
So how do you,
Right.
so how do you police that? Because
Okay. I got it. So Mitchell and I are having a both public and a private conversation out in public. So things are getting a little complicated. I would say I will come at it from this. I'm not going to fully answer your question because I can't in 1 minute, but I can give a frame. Where this is going to end up is the temple has chosen 13 different issue areas that we are going to be open to engaging in. 13 different areas of policy that we may be engaging on. And the people who have been chosen to take on leadership roles in some of those areas, obviously, if you're going to be a leader on our immigration work, for example, you better be pretty well in line with the temple's position vis-a-vis immigration. Do you need to also be in line with our position vis-a-vis anti-Semitism? Not necessarily. If you're going to be the VP of social justice, then I think that you do. And this is where I would say, Mitchell, it's not a question of could you or couldn't you, but who's the best candidate that's out there, right? To find someone who's in lockstep on every single one of these issues and has the time and has the leadership talent to actually lead a group, that may be hard to be able to do. This is like, organizing a community is messy and complicated. And so if we have someone who is our very, very best leader of our immigration work, but they don't want to be engaging on our advocacy for Israel, I'm okay with that. Because we are still a large organization where we don't require unanimity and uniformity of position, right? The bigger question that the congregation struggle with, which is to say, the temple's going to come out and take certain positions, and there will be members of the congregation, even longtime ones, who say, I don't agree with all of that. Is this still my temple? Am I still welcome here? Can I still feel comfortable here? And this was one of the things that, and this leads me exactly where I was going to go, which is to say the answer is yes. Yes, and. We were never in a position to say, if you don't ascribe to all 13 of these principles, this is not a safe place for you. That has never been the position that we are going to take. However, if there is a person who says, I can't belong to a congregation that feels X, Y, or Z thing, that's a personal choice that they have to be able to make, right? So for example, if your belief is that there should be no immigration to the United States of any kind, right? And there are people in our country who take that policy position. That is going to be in direct contravention to at least some pieces of our immigration position, because we are a community of immigrants, right? No one in this room is a Native American, right? And so advocating for at least some openness to immigration is a key piece of, actually, it's not even a key piece, it's like a side piece, but it's a piece of what we do. And if you believe that we should have closed borders, then your belief is going to contravene the temple's position vis-a-vis immigration, and there'll be members of your congregation who are going to be out advocating in the name of your congregation against your beliefs. Okay? If you can stomach that, this is your congregation, right? This is, because you come here for the spiritual experiences and the worship experiences and the learning. And there's a lot of different facets to being a part of the synagogue. We're not gonna kick you out over that. But if you feel like you can't be safe here anymore, or you don't wanna be here anymore, that's a decision that you are gonna be making. And this was a big question that up to the board level, the board talked about, which is to say, are we comfortable with the small number of our congregants saying, you know what? This is no longer the place that I wanna be. And the temple, the leadership position was, we're comfortable with that, right? Because we think this is too core to who we are as the people in the community to be able to have a very small minority of people who are that committed to not doing this work to get in the way of it happening. And there have been a very, very small number of families who have left the congregation over the last couple of years because of this work, but we're talking fractions of a percent. They are meaningful people, they are good people, but they've chosen they no longer want to be part of this congregation. And from a strict business perspective, the number of folks who are joining to be a part of this work is larger. Spencer.
This says our Reformed Jewish values, so
Yeah.
every one of our positions is grounded in some foundation of Judaism.
That's where we're going with this. That's where this conversation is going today and over the next 3 weeks. What are the groundings to this work? Yeah. The other thing that we wanted to remind people, and this is, I think, and this is a whole different conversation than the one we have next 3 weeks. I spent a lot of time in interfaith dialogue. And people always ask me, what is it about Judaism that is unique among the faith traditions? And one thing that I think is unique for us is our tradition and our community's ability to agree to disagree. We have deep in our tradition this notion which is called the machlokat l'shem shamayim, the disagreement for the sake of heaven. That we don't need uniformity of thoughts within our congregation or within our community. Some people think that this is good and some people think that is good. And our job as a religious group is not to make everyone be on the same page. There is space for a variety of opinion. And our congregation is certainly strong enough for people to agree with 85% of the consensus of this congregation. And we can respect them by saying, I disagree on 15%, and this is a place that we can still come together, right? And that is true on every single facet of Jewish life. I'll use some of the more extreme examples, okay? There are a small number of families in our congregation where their boys are not circumcised. Now, for generations and generations and generations, circumcision has been held up as one of the most important rites that you can do for your child, and one of the key things that, like, before anything else, that's the thing that we're going to keep doing. You don't lose your Judaism when you don't circumcise your son, and your son is not Jewish because they are not circumcised. Now, is that outside the norm of this congregation? By a lot. Are folks not welcome here because they don't circumcise? No. No. Do we think they should have made a different decision? Yeah. Do we chastise them? No. No. Right? And, within the realm of kashrut and Shabbat observance and all these, there's a lot of variety of thoughts. And that's okay. Our job as a congregation to try to figure out what the largest consensus is and hew towards that, knowing that we're never going to hit it in every single moment for anybody. Whether it's what melody we sing Shalom Aleichem to anything else. We encourage healthy disagreement and discussion to deepen our understanding of one another and the world around us. The last thing you should do is close off your mind to someone else's position. You should let them argue with you till they're blue in the face. You don't have to agree. It's okay. Mitchell.
From member to member.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone can have a different disparity of opinion.
Yeah.
For paid staff member.
Yeah.
Do you have a protocol? Do the people who you put in position who are paid by the temple, do they have to agree with the values of the temple that's set forth in those positions, or they Or are they entitled to not believe everything that that the temple set forth, but they're in that position anyway?
So I think that the best way to answer that is that when they are acting in behalf of the congregation, the expectation is that they are acting in line with the values of the congregation, but even as a paid staff person, we don't all do everything. The person who handles our accounts payable has a different set of expectations than a member of the clergy. And even within the clergy, there may be a variety of opinions on and within some of these issue areas. And I'll leave it at that, right? And one of the things that happens is that every one of our staff members, on a regular basis, the question of do they continue to be the right person in that role for this congregation is up for conversation, whether you're an at-will employee or a contracted employee, right? And so for example, if I began to believe that the work that we are doing is no longer in keeping with my personal values, I have some decisions to make. Either I need to try to change what we're doing, or I need to keep my disagreement, my dissatisfaction to myself, or I got to find somewhere else to work. If that's really the case, where it may be. But this isn't like on Tuesday there's a conversation and on Friday you're out the door kind of a thing. It's more of a general, are these things working or not? Do you agree with most things or not? And are there red lines? Potentially.
And people change.
And people change. All right. So getting to Spencer's question, we started with, all right, Reform Jewish values is a very large and amorphous term. And this was actually, could have been the most challenging piece of our work, which is what are the Reform Jewish values? What are the teachings of our tradition that are the most core? And of course, most core is a weird modifier, but are core to who we are as a congregation, right? The Torah's got a lot of words. The Talmud has a lot of words. The Midrashim have a lot of words. How do you choose which words are, some of you have read Animal House before, yeah, or Animal Farm before?
Oh, yeah.
Which words are more equal than others? Right, that's kind of what we're asking here, right? Just like, we for some reason we treated circumcision and eating matzah as like the most important Jewish act anyone could take, but they're no more or less important than the other 611 that we have. We treated them as more equal than others. What are the values of our tradition that should be the more equal ones in this work? And it occurred to us that question was in some ways already answered. Because walking around this building and walking around the building at Yamato and 441, you could actually see what are the parts of our tradition that our congregation has already deeply invested in. When you walk in the lobby, or you walk down our hallways, or you walk into the sanctuary, or you walk in the lobby of the Beck Family Campus, you see teachings of our tradition that are already deeply informing our congregation and informing our congregation more than other teachings in our tradition. And so we decided those need to be our bedrock principles. These, by the way, are not necessarily bedrock principles about immigration or women's rights or racial equity or Zionism. It's just what is being Jewish in this place? What are the things that are the most informative to being Jewish in this place that are going to guide our work? Okay. And we identified five teachings from our tradition that were already literally inscribed into the doorposts of our house and on our gates because they were already emblazoned on the walls of our congregational building.
That makes it a little easier.
It made it easier. So the first one is one that hangs on the wall just outside this room. All of Israel is responsible for one another. You've all heard that teaching before, right? Kol Yisrael Arabim Zeh Bazeh, right? Comes to us from the Talmud in Masechet Shavuot, and it's carved in metal on the walls of our Social Justice Center. Okay? Now, anyone know the context of that teaching?
I need to read more Talmud.
Right. So this is one of the ones, and all. One of the things that any Jewish organization is susceptible is the critique that you are taking a teaching out of its context and applying it in a different context, which is both true, but also not a devastating critique. And I say it's not devastating because if you look at the ways that the rabbis do the midrashic undertaking, right? When they're writing midrashim, that's exactly what they do. They take words from one part of the Hebrew Bible and they apply it out of context in a completely different one, right? And so in this context, the phrase is responsible for has a very specific meaning in Masechet Shavuot, which is not the meaning that every Jewish organization who cites this text, and every Jewish organization cites this text, takes it to mean. But I'm going to give you the benefit of coming to that conclusion all on your own. Where does this mean in Shavuot? Here is what it says. The Gemara asks, the Talmud asks a question. And this is in a conversation about criminal liability, right? When there are wrongdoers in your community, what are you supposed to do? With regard to all of the other transgressions in the Torah, all of the things the Torah says that you're not supposed to do, is punishment not exacted from the entire world? So the rabbis are wondering, on the one hand, the Torah says if someone breaks a rule, they're to be punished. The rebellious son is taken to the gates of the city and stoned to death. When someone steals an ox, they have to return the ox and pay a penalty of a few more oxen. If someone lets their controlled burn of their field get out of control and it burns your house down, they are liable for reimbursement. All these different individual torts and criminal offenses that there is personal reliability. But isn't there also communal liability? Doesn't the Torah say over and over and over again that not only are individuals liable, but big picture, the community is liable, right? Then when a community who in general does well, what's going to happen to them? They're going to be blessed, right? The rains will fall in their season and the fields will fill with flowers. But for the community who doesn't do what they're supposed to be doing, as a whole, what's going to happen? Drought, wildfire, earthquake, whatever it may be. That notion is also there. So it's at the same time, both an individual liability and a communal liability. Right? And so it cites this verse from Leviticus that says, and they shall stumble one upon the other. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. Doing mitzvahs leads to other folks doing mitzvahs. Avera goreret avera. And not doing mitzvahs or doing sins leads to others as well. And if I see someone doing a sin and I don't do anything about it, and I don't do the rebuke, then I'm responsible. There's all this interwoven liability and responsibility that our tradition tries to teach us. So this verse, and this is, the rabbis playing fast and loose, is homiletically interpreted to mean that they shall stumble spiritually due to the iniquity of another. If my neighbor, my fellow community member does sin, I am spiritually brought low as a result, and vice versa. And the inverse. If I do mitzvahs and I encourage others to do mitzvahs, it will elevate them spiritually as well, which of course leads to more mitzvahs. And that's how we get to this big picture of making the world better in the world to come. So it teaches then, therefore, that the entire Jewish people are considered guarantors one for one another. Kol Yisrael Arabim Zeh Bazeh. Everything I do has an impact on everybody else. Everything everybody else does has an impact on me. And so I have to see myself that my actions affect more than just me. Which is where we get this notion that Kol Yisrael Arabim Zeh Bazeh. Apparently, any transgression makes the entire world liable to be punished. So in the Talmud, it's about liability for punishment. But what our people have done, taking that notion of mutual responsibility and mutual liability, is expanded it out of just the liability for punishment, but also into the positive as well, which is I am responsible for my fellow's transgressions. I am also reaping the benefit of his accomplishments, and I should see myself as concerned, therefore, as to the well-being of everyone in my community, even those who live halfway around the world. Right? Which is why, and again, one of the uniquenesses of our community, when Jews in Greece are in peril, we feel it. This is one of the things that one of my clergy colleagues said to me after October 7th, which is that because that notion is not nearly as strong in Christianity, that there were some folks in the Christian community who looked on with horror and devastation the plight of Israelis on October 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th. But it didn't occur to them that Jews in Florida would be affected viscerally by it. They assumed that we'd have sort of the general, this is so terrible concern for humanity that they had, but they didn't appreciate that we would feel it as if it was our next door neighbor and our cousins, which it was. That's the part that they missed out on in the first bit of time afterwards. Then they decided to ignore our concern, but at least initially they said that they weren't really sure that it was gonna affect us. This is unique to being Jewish. And so in general, while this is the original teaching of Kol Yisrael Arvim Zeh Bazeh, it also in most parts of the Jewish world has this general notion that Jews locally, regionally, nationally, and globally are in mutual relationship and mutual care and concern for one another. And that's why when we ask ourselves, where ought we spend our time helping others, we have a special consideration for Jews and Jewish needs, right? Not to the exclusion of those in our local community who are in need, but we evaluate them on different sets of parameters. And we do privilege Jewish concerns over others.
But we have to, Torah tells us that, right?
Exactly. So this is the gloss that we put on this teaching. We are responsible for the Jewish people, for the well-being of the Jewish people, wherever they may be. To be Jewish is not just a national identity, not just a religious identity, and not just an ethnic identity, but a combination of all three. This is one of the many characteristics that differentiate us as a people. The care and responsibility for all Jews as the people of Israel. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. Okay? Again, this is foundational, we haven't even gotten to how is this going to play out in real time. This is foundational to who we are as a congregation. And when we ask ourselves, what ought we do, it's going to be with this in mind. That's one. Here's number two. There's five. You shall love the stranger. V'hatem ager. Where do we see that? Well, when you walk in the building today, on the tapestry, the center tapestry, among loving Torah and loving God is loving the stranger. From Deuteronomy chapter 10. In the Torah, we read that verse actually 36 times. You shall love the stranger. The Torah underscores this instruction in its repetition, guiding us to show our care and compassion, not just for our own people, but for those around us, inspiring us to pursue justice, not just for ourselves, but for all. Now, already these two values are somewhat in tension, right? We have a unique and special concern for Jews, Kol Yisrael Arvim Zeh Bazeh, and we have a unique and special concern for strangers. Are they mutually exclusive? No, they're both values. Because we can hold two ideas and two thoughts in our mind at the same time. God said to us, up, resume the march at the head of the people, that they may go and possess the land I swore to their fathers to give them. And now, O Israel, what does your God the Eternal demand of you? Only this, to revere your God the Eternal, to walk only in divine paths, to love and serve your God the Eternal with all your heart and soul. keeping the Eternal's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Mark the heavens that their uttermost reaches belong to your God, the Eternal, the earth and all that is in it. Yet it was to your ancestors that the Eternal was drawn out of love for them, so that you, their lineal descendants, were chosen from among the peoples, as is now the case. Cut away, therefore, the thickening of your hearts and stiffen your necks no more. God chose our ancestors for a specific responsibility and a specific arrangement and a specific relationship. And our God is God supreme, the great, mighty, and awesome God who shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. You must revere the Eternal, only God shall you worship, and to God shall you hold fast, and by your God's name shall you swear. The Eternal is your glory and your God, who wrought you these marvelous, awesome deeds that saw you with your own eyes. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now your Eternal, the God, your Eternal, has made you numerous as the stars in heaven. God set us aside for a special relationship. And one of the expectations is that we're not only going to care about ourselves, we're going to care about others as well. That's an outgrowth of the special relationship that we had with God. Because we have a unique perspective on how it feels to be othered. Because of our experience in Egypt. We were strangers in Egypt. We were oppressed because of our strangeness. Let us never fall into the taste of treating others like strangers and less than because there are strangers. What's beautiful about this is it reinforces the idea that even our values have within them internal tension. And so it just makes sense that as they play out, there's going to be tension. And value tension is a feature, not a bug, of being Jewish. We hold multiple ideas in our head at once. Yes, eventually we have to make some decisions. Eventually we have to decide we're going to privilege one value to a degree over the other in this moment. But in the next situation, we might go the other way. We're never abdicating any of our values. We're just choosing moment to moment how our constellation of values is going to shake down in that particular question. And by the way, among members of a congregation, among leaders of a congregation, they may have different inclinations for those individual questions as they may come up. That's okay. That's okay. Questions? Moving on. Tzedek to go. Justice, justice you shall pursue. This one was a little bit easier to pick why it was there, but it is, again, written on our walls already. It's on the justice wall. We are told to pursue justice. So they don't just respond to injustice, but we actively seek to ensure a more just, more fair, and more equal world. The word justice is said not once, but twice, emphasizing its importance. And I would also add emphasizing the multifaceted nature of the pursuit of justice. It is both addressing injustice and trying to make what may already be a just world even more just. It teaches us that we should pursue just ends through just means, that you can't use unjust means to get to a just end. We have an obligation to make our world more just and fair, not only for the Jewish people, but for all of humanity. And this comes from Deuteronomy. We shall appoint magistrates and officials for our tribes. This is the guidance of setting up a society in the land of Israel. In all the settlements that God is giving us, they shall govern with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes. For bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice, justice you shall pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God, the Eternal, has given. You must not remain indifferent.
Got a question.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell us in one of these sessions about how this stuff applies to the 13 things we're doing, right?
That's the next part of the presentation. Yeah. We got 3 weeks, Spencer. Yeah. We got 7 minutes. We're probably not gonna get to today, but I'll give you a little preview.
What is last week?
Our call to pursue justice starts with the injustice that we see and realize that we are obligated to do something about it. Our tradition teaches us the moral obligation to give, to help, to repair. It is an injustice not to do something. Recognizing the enormous burden placed upon us to fight injustice, our tradition teaches that we are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are we free to desist from it. The teaching from Rabbi Tarfon in Pirkei Avot, right? We will never be able to eradicate all of the injustice in the world, but we cannot turn a blind eye to any of it. Again, attention there. You're never going to accomplish and you can't ignore. Right? When I set out to do something, I want to do it. To be told you're never going to do it and you have to do it, that feels a little bit unusual. But that is the position that we are as Jews see ourselves in. We're never going to be fully successful, but we still have to try every single opportunity to move towards success.
Perfection is an aspiration, not a destination.
Correct. This comes from a series of verses about, needing to help our fellow Israelite get their ox or sheep back. You can't ignore a wandering animal, right? And you have to really go the extra mile. You can't just, if you know whose it is, you got to try to find out where they live. And if you don't know whose it is, you got to try to ask whose it is and then find out where they live, right? You got to do all these things. You can't just ignore the thing you see on the side of the road. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. This one might be my favorite. If you haven't been to the Beck family campus, some of you may not have been. The design of the building is a little bit different. You walk in and there's a welcome desk right there. And then on the left wall is the names of all the folks who made big contributions to help bring the Beck family campus to fruition in 2009. And then emblazoned in big letters above is this line from the Talmud. As my ancestors have planted for me, so do I plant for my children.
You had 3 kids, you're working at that pretty hard.
I'm not even thinking about my children, it's my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, right? That's what this is about. As the inheritors of a world formed and shaped by the generations who have come before us, we recognize that many of our blessings are the result of their efforts to leave us with a world we can safely inhabit and in which we can thrive. To express our appreciation for that gift, we will seek to fulfill the obligation to leave for the generations who will come after us the blessings of a world in which they too can thrive. So my kids got to go to a preschool because people a generation and 2 older than me made contributions to bring that preschool to fruition. My goal as an instructor, at least, adjunct in that preschool, is to train youth that they, when they are grandparents, have the opportunity to leave something for 2 generations after them. That's a 6-generation spread. That's what I'm thinking about when I think of this verse. Susan.
It reminds me of the farmer who's planting a tree and the man who's.
Yes,
Sorry.
the man who's walking by and saying,
Says, you'll never see the fruits of your labor.
do you know why it reminds you of that? Because that's where it's from, right? It's about Honi, the circle maker, who's having the dreams back and forth, and he needs to bring. This is a 2,000-year-old story from the Talmud. And one day he's walking by and he sees a certain man planting a carob tree. And Honi says to him, this tree, after how many years will it take to bear fruit? And the man said to him, it will not produce fruit for 70 years. And Honi says, Nudnik, you're not going to live 70 years that you should benefit from this tree. Implied, why are you bothering? You're not going to benefit from this. And he says, that man found himself a world full of carob trees. Just as my ancestors planted for me, I too am planting for my descendants. The world will only have carob trees if people have the magnanimity to plant carob trees from which they will never benefit. It was beautiful to tell this to be in Neo Kadumim, which is a nature preserve outside of Tel Aviv that has only biblical species planted in it. And to tell the story to teenagers sitting underneath a carob tree.
They
And
really take 70 years to bear fruit.
They do,
Yeah.
they really do. And they'll bear fruit for many, many decades after that. But it takes a long time from planting for them to give fruit, as compared to like an olive tree, which is only a couple of years. Right, so it's a long distance. But we'll only have carob trees if we have people who have spiritual patience and patience of generosity. And the carob tree is one example of which there are many, right? How many of you live in Palm Beach County and pay property taxes in Palm Beach County? Keep your hands up if you have children who go to school in Palm Beach County schools.
Well, I did.
You don't anymore.
Well,
You're still paying taxes,
right.
right? Property taxes, paying for education, and spreading the responsibility across the entire community, whether or not they will or have or will ever have kids in the school, is another example of this from secular frame.
Can I say another example? It's that. When people say I'm 90 years old and I grew up and my kids lived in New York, my response to those people are, you better pay for taxes because those people coming up are gonna be taking care of you.
That's right.
So I think a lot of people can be very short-sighted on what education means to them.
And our tradition makes clear that we understand it. Susan?
I was just gonna say that, when my children were growing up and they were in second and fourth grades when we moved here. And then, kids, the parents, after the children were b'nai mitzvah, said, oh, I don't need the temple
Right.
anymore. But my husband and I always felt that we couldn't always afford to send the kids when we were young. And other people paid so that we could do that. And I've never dropped my membership, even though I have
No joke.
because I believe that without people who care about the congregation and are willing to support it for future generations.
Thank you. Thank you. We are at time. I'm gonna give you a quick preview as to what this is gonna look like. Each core position has a statement, has which of those 5 core positions it is informed by, and then another set of teachings from our tradition that specifically speak to that particular issue. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of reasoning that went into this. And if we can explore 3 or 4 of these over the next 2 weeks, I will be very, very, very happy. But we're at time for today, so thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That's seven. Yeah, this is.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.